Daf Yomi, Tractate Menachot, page 15b, but we're in the last line of 15a. Gemara was asking a question. The Gemara asks, and do we say a Kal V'chomer, an a fortiori inference in this way? But isn't it taught in a bright? Oh, the Gemara is asking, do we say, can you make a Kal V'chomer like this? Meaning, they're challenging that. They're saying, well, look at this story, what happened, and then you'll have a problem with that. What is that story? But isn't it taught in a bright? There was an incident involving one. Yeah, Shizaro Karmo, na top of 15b. Shizaro Karmo, Shechavero Smadao. Ubama says, Bechachami, V'isru. Asru esa zoraim, mitiru esa gefanim. Biamai lemikal v'chayim v'uma yiseren esa ba'al esa erin shlo yidasa. There was an incident involving one who planted seeds in the vineyard of another when the grapes on the vines were budding. Now the incident came before the sages, and they deemed the seeds prohibited due to the prohibition against planting diverse kinds in a vineyard. But they deemed the vines permitted. The Gemara continues, but why did they deem the seeds prohibited? Let the sages say, through an analogous Kal V'chomer inference, that the seeds should be permitted. And if that which renders an item prohibited, meaning the vine which causes the seeds to be prohibited, is itself not prohibited, then with regard to the seeds which come to render the vines prohibited but did not render the vines prohibited, is it not logical that they should not be rendered prohibited? The Gemara rejects the comparison. It says, how can these be compared? Hasam kanbos. Kanbos is cannabis, literally, hemp. Hasam kanbos v'duvas chatoira ditznanoisa. Today is a kanbos v'lof. לא יהא זורק על גביהם שהן עושות של 3 שנים שאר זרעים מדרבנן הוא דאסירי היידה ודסורה כנסו רבנן היידה ודסורה לא כנסה רבנן אבל הכה למה קל וחומר. The Gemara rejects the comparison. How can these cases be compared? There in the Braita only hemp. Kanbos is hemp. Cannabis, kanbos. There only hemp and arum are prohibited by Torah law to be sown in a vineyard. As we learned in the Mishnah in Klayim 2:5, if one's field was sown with hemp and arum, he should not sow above them, as they produce a yield only once every 3 years. Other seeds are prohibited by rabbinic law. Therefore, with regard to this person who committed a transgression by planting the seeds in the vineyard of another, the sages penalized him and deemed his seeds prohibited. But as for that person who did not commit a transgression, meaning the owner of the vineyard, the sages did not penalize him. But here, in the case of pigul, which is a biblical prohibition, let us say such a Kal V'chomer. Ika misnila akavasim. Ba'a minei Rabbi Lazar mirav v'shochet es kavasim lechol kazayis mehem u'menach ma'u. And there are those who teach the dilemma of Rabbi Lazar with regard to the lambs brought with the 2 loaves and not with regard to a thanks offering. Rabbi Elazar raised the dilemma for Rav in a case where one slaughters the lambs with the intent to consume in all bulk from them and from their loaves. The next day, what is the halacha? Le'paluge kibosim lo kemiboeli hashtakul el melechem lo pigli mahan mehen lachman miboye ka miboeli le'palugo le'lechem b'misar kibosim lo pigli lechem lo. Rabbi Lazar elaborated, I do not raise the dilemma with regard to rendering the lambs pigul for the following reason. Now that in a case where his intent was to consume an entire olive bulk from the loaves alone, The lambs are not rendered pigul, as the Mishnah teaches that pigul intent with regard to the loaves does not render the lambs pigul. Then in a case where his intent to consume half an olive bulk from them and half an olive bulk from their loaves, is it necessary to teach that the lambs are not pigul? Rather, when I raised the dilemma, it was with regard to rendering the loaves pigul. Does this intention with regard to the lambs combine with this intention with regard to the loaves to render the loaves pigul or not? Amar le af bizo alechem mifugal lekosim inu yugalim ba'mai le makal v'chomer uma mifagalin mitpagel laba lepagel v'lo pigel eno din shelo yitpagel. Rav said to Rabbi Elazar, even in this case, the loaves are rendered pigul and the lambs are not rendered pigul. The Gemara asks, but why should the loaves be rendered pigul? Let us say the following kal v'chomer inference, and if that which it renders an item pigul, meaning the lambs, since it is maintained that intent to consume half an olive bulk from the lambs assists to render the loaves pigul, is itself not rendered pigul, then with regard to the loaves which come to render the lambs pigul, but do not render them pigul, as the intent to consume half an olive bulk from the loaves does not combine with the intent to consume half an olive bulk from the lambs to render them pigul, is it not logical that the loaves themselves should not be rendered pigul? ומאמרינן קל וחומר כי היי גבנה ויותניה מעשה באחד שזר קל משה לחבר וסמדה וכו' ואמרי למה קל וחומר מה האוסר אינו נאסר הבא לאסר ולא אסר אינו דין שלא יתאסר. The Gemara asks, and do we say a kal v'chomer inference of this kind? But isn't it taught in the Braita that there was an incident involving one who planted seeds in the vineyard of his friend when the grapes on the vines were budding, and the incident came before the sages, and they deemed the seeds prohibited due to the prohibition against planting diverse kinds in a vineyard. But they deemed the vines permitted. The Gemara continues, but why did they deem the seeds prohibited? Let the sages say, through an analogous kal v'chomer inference, that the seeds should be permitted, and if that which renders an item prohibited, meaning the vine, which causes seeds to be prohibited, is itself not prohibited, then with regard to seeds which come to render the vines prohibited, but did not render the vines prohibited, is it not logical that they should not be rendered prohibited? Achihashta, looks like it's repeating. Achihashta hasam kanabos veluf asra toira shazroim midvabano desiri hayda v'lisura kensu rabanan deloi v'lisura v'lekansu rabanan. The Gemara rejects the comparison. How can these be compared? They're in the Braita, only hemp and arum are prohibited by Torah law to be sown in a vineyard. Other seeds are prohibited by rabbinic law. Therefore, with regard to this person who committed a transgression by planting the seeds in the vineyard of another, the sages penalized him and deemed his seeds prohibited. But as for this person who did not commit a transgression, meaning the owner of the vineyard, and the sages did not penalize him, but here, in the case of pigul, which is a biblical prohibition, let us say a kal v'chomer inference. Man demasila toida kol sheken gavasim. Man demasila gavasim gavasim hudi huskukul zela zela tzunufa. Aval toida lo huskukul zela zela tzunufa la. The Gemara notes, the one who teaches the dilemma of Rabbi Elazar was raised with regard to the thanks offering and accompanying loaves. All the more so will hold that the dilemma may be raised with regard to the case of the lambs brought with the 2 loaves on Shavuot. But the one who teaches that Rabbi Elazar's dilemma was raised with regard to the lambs and the 2 loaves, it is possible that he holds that the dilemma was raised only with regard to the lambs and the 2 loaves, as they were bound to one another by waving, since the priest waves the lambs and loaves together. See Leviticus 23:20. But with regard to a thanks offering and its loaves, as they were not bound to one another by waving, the dilemma was not raised, since it is obvious in this case that his intentions do not combine. Okay. רבה בסוטי באילחי, באי מני רב לזמרה, שוחט זרקב לאכול כזית מחברו למחר מהו. חברו כזמש פרלו מפגל עולל מלאלכם, דיל מלאכם לא אשמר לפגלים. Rabbi Abba the Small, Rabbi Abba the Small taught that Rabbi Lazar raises the lemma in this manner. Rabbi Lazar raised the lemma for Rav. If one slaughters one of the lambs brought on Shavuot with the 2 loaves intending to consume in all the bulk from the other the next day, what is the halacha? When this individual thinks of the other, does he mean the other lamb? And if so, the lamb is not rendered pigul, as one permitting factor does not render another permitting factor pigul. Or perhaps, when this individual thinks of the other, he means the other part of the offering, meaning the 2 loaves, and if so, his intention renders it pigul, as taught in the Mishnah. Amar le tnetua shachalecha min gvasim lecha mimenu lebachol. ופגל לחברו שלך לחברו למחור 2 כשייכים על לחברו כבש משמע דין מדפר שמע לחברו כבש. Rav said to Rabbi Elazar, you learned in the Mishnah 16a, if one slaughtered one of the lambs with the intent to partake of it the next day, that lamb is pigul and the other is fit. If he slaughtered one lamb with the intent to partake of the other next day, both lambs are fit, as one permitting factor does not render another permitting factor pigul. Rav concludes, evidently, in this context, the term the other means the other lamb. The Gemara rejects this proof. Perhaps the Mishnah is discussing a case where he clarifies and says the other lamb, but the Mishnah is not referring to a case where he merely thought the other. That's it for the Talmud. New Mishnah. Sagt in the Mishnah, Zevach mefagel es nesachim, mi shekad shubechli divrei meir nesachim min mefaglim. Et hazevach keitzad shochet es hazevach lechol mimenu lemachol. Hu nesacha mipugalin leakriv nesacha lemachol. Hanesachim mipugalin hazevach enu mifugal. The Mishnah says, the animal offering renders the accompanying libations and meal offerings pigul from the moment that they were consecrated in the vessel, but not before. This is the statement of Rabbi Meir. The libations do not render the animal offering pigul. How so? In the case of one who slaughters the offering with intent to partake of it the next day, the offering and its libations are rendered pigul. But if one slaughters the offering with the intent to sacrifice its libations the next day, the libations are rendered pigul, while the offering is not pigul. That's the Mishnah, and now for the Talmud. Zok the Talmud. Talmud Rabbanan niskevei machayovin aleim mishum bigul mipnei shedam azevach matiran lekrav divrei Rabbi Meir. The sages taught in a Braita. With regard to libations of an animal offering, one is liable for eating them due to the violation of the prohibition of pigul, as the blood of the offering permits them to be offered on the altar, and any item that becomes permitted for consumption or for sacrifice through a permitting factor can be rendered pigul, and one who partakes of such an item after its permitting factors for sacrifice is liable to receive karet. This is a statement of Rabbi Meir. Amru lo Rabbi Meir, ve'alo adam. Maybe zevchayom nesachah azasar yamim amrahem. Af ani lo mati ela bevayin im hazevach amru lo efshar lishanoto lezevach acher. The rabbis said to Rabbi Meir, but a person may bring his offering today and the accompanying libations from now until even 10 days later. Evidently, then, the blood of the offering does render the libations permitted. Rabbi Meir said to them, I too spoke only about libations that come to be sacrificed together with the offering and were already sanctified in a service vessel for that purpose. The rabbi said to him, but is it possible to switch libations? No, the rabbi said to him, but it is possible to switch the libations for use with another offering. Clearly then, they are not considered an indispensable part of that offering. Rava said, Rabbi Meir holds that the libations are fixed to this particular offering at the time of its slaughter, and one may not use them with another offering. Accordingly, these libations are rendered pigul on account of intent during the slaughter of the offering, just like the loaves of a thanks offering, which are fixed to a particular thanks offering upon its slaughter and become pigul on account of intent during the slaughter of that particular thanks offering. Tanu Rabbanan lo kshemen shel b'tzarech hayav v'nalav b'shem pigul mipnei shedama shamatiro lebahoinois divrei Rabbi Meir im amru loi leRabbi Meir ve'alo adam mevi ashamayoim v'lo michan ve'ad 10 yomim. In a similar vein, the sages taught with regard to the log of oil of the leper, see Leviticus 14:10-20. One is liable for eating it due to the violation of the prohibition of pigul. If the guilt offering that this oil company became pigul, as the blood of the offering permits it to be placed on the right thumb and the big toe of the leper. This is the statement of Rabbi Meir. The rabbi said to Rabbi Meir, but a person may bring his guilt offering today and the accompanying log of oil from now until even 10 days later. Evidently, the log of oil is not considered part of the guilt offering, and therefore it should not be rendered pigul on account of it. Amar lahen, af ani lo amarti ela beba im asham efshar l'shana shemachel amarav kasav Rabbi Meir b'shchita kalach mitoida. Rabbi Meir said to them, I too spoke only about a log of oil that comes with the guilt offering. The rabbi said to him, but even in this case, the oil should not be considered part of the offering, as it is possible to switch the oil for use with another guilt offering. Rava said, Rabbi Meir holds that the log of oil is fixed to this particular guilt offering at the time of its slaughter and is therefore rendered pigul on account of it, just like the loaves of a thanks offering, as the slaughter of the thanks offering fixes the accompanying loaves to that particular offering.